Good evening, everyone. My name is Mackenzie Smith, and I am the University Librarian and Vice Provost for Digital Scholarship at UC Davis. On behalf of the UC Davis Library, welcome to our first virtual event in the Savor lecture series, hosting thought leaders, entrepreneurs, policymakers, and researchers for illuminating discussions of critical topics in food and wine being studied at UC Davis. This evening's topic could not be more timely. Several months into this crisis, we see the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic all around us. For many of us, one of the most visible and initially surprising effects was food shortages at grocery stores. COVID-19 is a public health crisis, but it has also revealed weak links in our food supply chain. Why that is happening is what we'll hear about tonight. To open our program, I'm honored to introduce UC Davis Chancellor Gary May. Chancellor May is a highly engaged leader with a passion for helping others succeed. He believes success is best judged by how we enhance the lives of others. Throughout his career, he's championed diversity, equity, and inclusion, and developed nationally recognized programs that support underrepresented groups in science, technology, engineering, and math. In 2015, President Obama honored him with the Presidential Award for Excellence in STEM Mentoring. He was inducted into the National Academy of Engineering in 2018, and just last month, he was one of 276 artists, scientists, public, nonprofit, and private sector leaders elected to the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. His vision as UC Davis's 7th chancellor is to lead the university to new heights in academic excellence, inclusion, public service, and upward mobility for students from all backgrounds. Tonight's panel, which brings together UC Davis experts with policy and industry leaders, demonstrates that public service mission. Please join me in welcoming Chancellor May.
Thank you, Mackenzie. On behalf of UC Davis, I'd like to welcome everyone to this virtual event. First, I hope that everyone is staying healthy and comfortable as we all shelter in place. The COVID-19 pandemic has turned our world upside down, and now we're all adjusting to what is a new normal. Over these past few weeks, a trip to the grocery store is much more than a simple errand. We arrive with our protective masks, practice social distancing, and wonder what we'll find in stock. We wonder if the stores will have eggs, cheese, meats, and essential foods that our families need. We sometimes see depleted shelves and signs that require us to limit our certain purchases. Thank goodness we can now get toilet paper. In the end, we wonder if our food distribution systems are sturdy enough to weather this pandemic. That's where UC Davis comes in. We have experts all across campus studying this most pressing of issues and providing leadership. The complexity of our food distribution systems requires a multidisciplinary approach, and that's where this university excels. Our panelists include UC Davis experts in agricultural economics, the structure of food systems, and more. We're approaching this topic from many sides with help from Jenny Lester Moffitt, Undersecretary of the California Department of Food and Agriculture, and our guests from the worlds of supermarkets and food distribution. Thanks to the Robert Mondavi Institute for Wine and Food Science and the UC Davis Library for organizing this event with such urgency. In the end, I believe we'll come away with a much stronger understanding about the state of food distribution. So take care, everyone, and stay safe. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Andrew Waterhouse, Director of the Robert Mondavi Institute. Thank you, Chancellor, for that warm welcome. Savor lectures are focused on food and beverage policies, and when we saw empty shelves in the grocery store, it was clear that the Savor team had an urgent issue to bring to the public. Today, we're asking our moderator and speakers to address the question of why we're seeing empty supplies at grocery stores and what has led to those shortages. Specifically, we have asked them to focus on the structural issues in the food distribution market that might have led to these outcomes. We're well aware that there are broader issues that come into play here, such as workforce compensation and safety, food safety, land use policies, the list goes on. However, tonight we would like them to delve into the question of the current structure of our food distribution system and hold these other important issues for another day. Please submit your questions via the Q&A window and the panel will try to answer as many of your questions as possible tonight. The questioner's name will not be mentioned. Our moderator tonight is Catherine Brinkley. She is an assistant professor in the UC Davis Department of Human Ecology. Her research is supported by the USDA, Pew Charitable Trusts, and the National Institute of Environmental Health Sciences. In addition, she advises the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. Her research focuses on the architecture of food supply networks, and she is currently studying how California farms are coping with the disruption of the pandemic. Please join me in welcoming Professor Brinkley.
Thank you, Andy. Many food supply chains start in California because of our diverse farms. California leads the nation in production of fruits, nuts, vegetables, milk, and beef. Most food supply chains are streamlined for efficiency. Farms are contracted to produce to specifications that match the needs of aggregators, processors, and distributors to package and sell the food to retailers who have long-standing contracts. This is why you can buy a package of tomatoes that are all the same color, shape, and size. There are really two main streams: the food supply chain that goes to grocery stores and the one that goes to institutional purchasers, such as schools, universities, and restaurants. While we shelter in place, there's more food demand through grocery stores and less from institutions that are now closed. But many still have contracts in place for food throughout the entire year. There's also a smaller food supply system, the one that I primarily study, that sells through short supply chains, such as farmers markets or community-supported agriculture. This more distributed system is less streamlined and governed by social relationships, not long-term contracts. The coronavirus pandemic is acting as a stress test for how fragile or flexible our overall food supply is. We've invited Daniel Sumner to begin the conversation. He's a professor of agricultural and resource economics and the director of the University of California Agricultural Issues Center. He has led prominent roles at the President's Council of Economic Advisors and the US Department of Agriculture, where he served as the Assistant Secretary for Economics. In 1998, he was named a Fellow of the American Agricultural Economics Association. We've asked him to explain why some food supply chains are fragile and dislocated, but others are not. Are there inherent weaknesses that will lead to persistent or repeated shortages, or can we expect a rapid recovery? What has led to the current structure of our food supply chains? We'll get to some potential policy solutions in the Q&A, but for now, please join me in welcoming Daniel Sumner.
Thank you, Catherine. We have had a disruption that suddenly, really overnight, changed where and what we eat. And Catherine made a very good point that it shifted from restaurants to eating at home. We're not in our school cafeterias. We're not drinking milk out of little 8-ounce cartons. And I have been, I thought it's been remarkable how we have had so much disruption, and yet we've all had plenty to eat. There's been plenty of food for all of us. We may not, if we shop late in the day, maybe something wasn't there. Occasionally there's been some food that wasn't around for a day or two. But really, for those people that have the income or the access to the government benefits, the food has been there. The price of eggs jumped up, but now they've slid back. The disruption in meat supply has been really quite minor. Lots of headlines, but most of the meat's been there. And I think that's the real emphasis here. We've had a food system that's worked really remarkably well. Now let's talk a minute about that resilience. Our food system is especially designed for supply shocks. You have a freeze in the orange fields, or you lose some lettuce because of a disease. That is on the supply side. This has really been an unprecedented shift on the demand side, when and where people want to eat. Really unheard of, really as long as I've been studying these things, which is a very long time. The biggest concern I have, frankly, is the lack of income. That is, we've lost, because of the economic disruption, massive amounts of income in the United States and globally. That is, we're in the midst of a global recession of unprecedented suddenness, a shocking lack of income. which means there's lots and lots of vulnerable people who weren't vulnerable earlier. They're typically the people that were at risk. They lose their job, whether it's somebody, a food service worker who's working in the back of the restaurant. They're probably already poor and now they're out of work and they've got nothing. Farm workers are still at work, but lots of other people are in trouble. We've increased SNAP benefits, food stamps. We've increased dollars for the women, infants, and children's programs. But there's really this lack of income, which is the biggest pressure right now on families when it comes to a food system. There are also a group of people, and I'm glad we have people on the panel that can speak more to this, who in a sense fall through the government benefit programs, especially, for example, people whose immigration status may not be secure, or someone in their family. That means they may not be eligible, or they just don't want to participate in government programs for a variety of reasons. And there are a number of community efforts, some of them government supported. USDA has a brand new program where they're passing out several $1 billion. The food industry is heavily involved. We're using the same supply chain to get food and food products to people when and where it's needed. And farms, distributors, processors, they're all contributing to this. Catherine mentioned there's a segment of local food distribution, short chain, you could call it. You go to the farmer's market like many of us in Davis do every Saturday and sometimes on Wednesdays. That amounts to 1% of the food that people eat in America, maybe less. It's wonderful, we all love it, but we can't really rely on it. And especially, we're so blessed here in California, we can have a farmer's market year round. That doesn't work most places. And in many urban places, they do have farmers markets. And to be blunt, they're for the rich. The prices are high, and they're high because costs are very high. They're not for the average person trying to feed the family. Let's turn to the farms and other businesses. We know they've lost big, and we could put that in billions, but that's not the point. There are people that have lost their livelihoods relying on what they built up their whole life. Market demand is down because of the income loss, because of the disruptions in the supply chain, because export markets, remember this is a global issue, so export markets are down. We filled up storage so that we don't have any place to put some commodities. All of this means that for many things, particularly meats, milk, some produce, a number of other products, farm prices have collapsed. And it's the price collapse that really hits the farmers. We all feel terrible when we see, say, milk poured down a drain. Turns out the farmers were paid for that milk. That's an emotional hit. The financial hit has, and the emotional hit's bad enough. The financial hit is the prices have collapsed. And if you could see my screen, you'd see a chart. I don't know if you can, but if you could, you'd see a chart of milk prices that you don't need to know the units. It was about 17 cents a pound, $17 or $18 a hundredweight for milk going into this year. Dairy farmers were, for the first time in several years, probably going to make some money this year. Farming is a tough business. Prices go up and down. In the years you make your money, you pay back your debts, so because there'll be years where you won't. Well, what happened is sometime mid-February, prices started falling and falling fast. I'm showing a chart of the class 1 and the class 4, or excuse me, class 3 and class 4 futures markets. This is milk being used for cheese and for milk powder and butter. Food ingredients for a lot of people, even cheese is often a food ingredient or going to food service. And as the coronavirus spread worldwide, South Korea's involved, Italy's involved, these prices start falling, such that by the end of April, we have prices that have fallen from $18 to $11. Now imagine what that means to a farm. Fortunately, at the end of April, prices kicked up for the cheese milk, but it's still low for the milk used for butter and powder. A farm might make a profit at $16 or $17 a hundredweight, a very efficient farm in California. You get down to 10 or 11 or $12, nobody's making any money. That's zero net income. Those farms are just struggling. They're going to hold on, most of them, some of them won't. But that's what's happening in agriculture now. Does that mean we won't be producing the food? No, it won't. It'll mean some of the farms will go further in debt. The cows will still be milked. The land will still be harvested. But they'll have to struggle and try to build back their equity later.
We're now going to pivot to the consumer experience, which might be a little bit more familiar for folks. Chelsea Miner is the corporate director of public affairs for Raley's grocery chain, which operates in Northern California and Nevada. She's also involved in community affairs and serves as chair of the West Sacramento Chamber of Commerce. She's going to explain what consumers cannot readily see about the grocery store industry. How do long-standing buying contracts impact retailers' ability to scale up purchasing, rapidly change suppliers, or allow for more open competition? Will the food supply chain be able to meet the rising demand in grocery stores? Please join me in welcoming Chelsea Miner.
Good evening. Thanks for having me. So most of my comments today will really remain around the grocery and what many of you have probably experienced. But at Raley's, our number one priority has, of course, been the health and safety of our customers and our team members, but also remaining open and serving our communities with the access to food and essential items. And I think that's really where the crux of a lot of the challenges happened, and that people were not sure once we started to shelter in place what availability they would have to food. What we know is that the food system in the United States is sophisticated and robust, and for the most part has kept up. As Dan mentioned, there is plenty of food. It may not be the options in which you've been looking for, but there is plenty of food within the system. What challenged us is really in the beginning when the shelter in place orders had started, and what we were seeing from customers is that they were buying for a 4 to 8 weeks periods worth of food. So you can imagine those are full freezers. Those are a lot of shelf staples like rice and potatoes. And of course, some of the irrational demand as we saw with paper products and cleaning products. But I will say, overall, the supply chain has remained strong. And I'm going to go through several different categories kind of as we go through here tonight. What we have seen is that the local supply chain is less prone to disruption as it relates to the food system. And we in California have benefited quite a bit from that. Of course, we talk often about being the farm to fork capital here in Sacramento, and that has actually boded very, very well for us. But we also produce a lot of beef and milk and dairy, as many of the other presenters have said, and that has provided a steady supply for the food system. What we didn't anticipate was that the demands would shift so rapidly, that once restaurants and these other food channels shifted so significantly, the increase from the demand from the customer was significant. So in produce, we saw a demand of about 40%. In meat and seafood, it was about 60%. Center store, which is all the kind of packaged good items, was about 35%. And of course, for those that have been busy baking, it's been about a 15 to 20% increase. But we actually think that that's very low because the supply issues have been challenged in that area specifically. The real big, of course, issue is that we didn't anticipate that spike so quickly. And what ends up happening in grocery specifically is those center store items, we don't have the same lead time that we maybe have in a fresh product like meat or produce. And so some of those items, those orders happened several months ago and aren't hitting the shelves for, future months in the future. So customers that are seeing empty shelves, especially right now, is less about a shortage and more about less varieties. So what we've been working with our suppliers is that those brands that maybe had, let's call it 100 SKUs at some point, are now reviewing what their top 25% sales SKUs are. They're limiting their production. They're being more efficient so that they can get those products back onto the shelves as fast as possible. So an example of that may be that you went into the pasta aisle and you had different varieties of Barilla pasta. Instead, you're going to see about 4 to 6 SKUs, where maybe previously you had saw maybe 20 to 30 SKUs. Paper products. It's always something on top of people's minds. It's something always people want to talk about because, of course, that was hit the hardest. A lot of that was the buzz. We talked earlier, someone mentioned about the meat and some of the buzz that's being associated with that. The demand for toilet paper continues to be significant. The larger challenge is not that the suppliers are not working hard to get that product back onto shelves, it's distribution. It's that we don't have enough trucks to actually pick up that product and deliver them to all of the markets that need them. So we're working with those. They are flowing into our distribution centers and down to our stores. It's just not very consistent. That's why you may see it on one day and not see it on another day. Your friend may tell you they went at 9 o'clock in the morning and you went at 11 and it's gone. It's selling pretty quickly because it's this fear, it's the demand, right? I'm seeing it now. I don't need it, but I'm seeing it and I'm afraid I'm not going to be able to get it later, so I'm purchasing now. And of course, we've been seeing that, of course, across multiple categories. So meat is a big hot topic in the media right now. And for Raley's specifically, we feel like there is plenty of meat within our supply chain. That is again because of our dependency on local supply. So we work with Foster Farms out of the Central Valley for chicken, and we work with Harris Ranch out of the Central Valley also for our beef, and our pork comes out of Iowa. But all three of our large vendor partners have put some operational things in place and have not seen the same amount of COVID cases amongst their employees as some of the national counterparts. But this is that constant reminder to reiterate to customers not to stockpile or overpurchase. And we know that we're getting into grilling season, so that demand is only going to continue to grow. And so what we can do to normalize our buying patterns, purchase what you need for the week, please go back. We'll see you next week, and we will have more meat on the shelf the following week. But with some challenges. So that's going to be this fluctuation of price. Based on the national commodity pricing, of course, that with some of the larger meat processing facilities like Tyson and Smithfield that has had the significant challenges, we are seeing that rise up the overall cost of meat and all proteins about 70%. So we're doing all that we can to keep those retails low, but again, thinking through that demand and the limited supply, customers should anticipate some fluctuations here over the coming weeks. One thing to note is you should also look for different varieties. So where maybe you preferred a non-bone piece of meat, you actually will probably get bone-in meat because those processing plants don't have enough staff or time right now to process in the same way that you would see it. So be open, be creative. Those are some of the things that we're recommending to our customers. Produce. Again, as the Farm to Fork capital, we've had some great success. One of the better parts of the supply chain for produce specifically is we are ordering product daily and we receive it within 24 to 48 hours. So peak of perfection, but at the same regard, that helps us be able to shift this demand and make sure that product is in our stores and is available. So while produce was initially disrupted in the early parts of the COVID crisis, it has been our fastest to rebound. Our vendor partners have been really supportive and helpful as we make that transition. One thing that I'll note is that we've gotten creative with produce. As some of the other panelists mentioned, you have products that potentially was supposed to go to a restaurant or a school, and now you have a farmer who has excess product. So we are taking different products, different SKUs, and giving them an economic opportunity to be sold through our stores. And so that level of versatility and relationships that we have with our local farmers, I think has been really successful as we think about making sure that that product doesn't go to waste. And then the last thing I'll talk a little bit just about is distribution. We are running trucks like crazy. It is the challenge though to make sure that we have enough drivers on the roads and that we have enough staff to unload shelves and things like that. So where we used to previously, run several hundred trucks, we've actually exceeded that about 100% to date, just to keep up with that demand in some of those key categories. But again, we're feeling very strong about our contributions and what we've been able to keep up with, recognizing some of the challenges that exist. I guess in close, we've been really proud of our strong service levels and what we've been able to accomplish. We also have implemented as many, have seen in store over 50 different operational changes to make sure that people are safe and that you have access to that food. So we want to continue to be a part of the solution and continue to work with our vendor partners to make sure that all those products are on the shelves for customers in the future. I'll stop there.
Thank you, Chelsea, for that real-time update of all of the challenges that are being faced by our essential workers in the grocery sector. Shifting deeper into the supply chain, we're now going to turn to Boo Nygrens, who's the co-owner and director of purchasing at Veritable Vegetable. This is the oldest distributor of organic food in the United States. As a distributor, they have developed demand for local and organic produce over the years, and they provide regional logistics. That includes supporting hundreds of small, mid-sized growers, operating a fleet of green trucks, and serving independent markets such as restaurants, co-ops across 5 states. So Nygrens has been with the company since 1978, in the business for a while. At Veritable Vegetable, many purchases are closer to real time, as many farms with short supply chains ramp up their CSA shares, and some restaurants like Chez Panisse and Berkeley turn to CSA models. Are you seeing more new or different farms who want to join the distribution network? And similarly, are you seeing shifts in who's purchasing? So please join me in welcoming Boo Nygrens.
Hi, everybody. I want to thank UC Davis and the people at Savor for inviting me to participate in this event. I appreciate it very much. I'd like to start off by asking the question that I want to raise, which is who controls distribution of food and for whose benefit? So just think about that while I'm talking today. We were established in 1974, and we are been operating out of San Francisco. I'm having a trouble with my PowerPoint here. Hang on a second. It's not. Oh, there we go. Okay, I don't know what's going on, but anyway, we were established in 1974, and we've been operating out of San Francisco for 46 years. We're women-owned and women-led. Of our 126 staff members, 45% are female. Women drive forklifts, but also sit on our leadership and executive teams. I've been with the company, as Catherine said, since 1978, stumbling in as a part-time truck driver one summer, although my primary work has been as a buyer, interfacing with farmers. We're a very unusual business, and we recognize that. We're a social enterprise driven by our values. Every decision made throughout the company considers environmental sustainability and social justice, but we are a for-profit corporation. We are proud of our green fleet. We operate 32 trucks in our region, and they're on the road every day of the year. We have earned numerous trucking awards for early adoption of green technologies. We often refer to our supply chain as our value chain because we strive to create strong and lasting relationships with like-minded businesses. Our primary focus and commitment has always been to serve small and mid-sized growers on the supply side and independents and co-ops on the customer side. This slide here shows a pre-COVID snapshot of our customer mix, but that was as of a couple of months ago. Both schools, restaurants, and corporate campuses have mostly disappeared. We primarily distribute organic produce regionally on our own trucks, but we also ship throughout Hawaii and to other national wholesalers. So here's a little bit of a take on what we think is going on nationally. Dominant structural issues have been exposed that reveal brittle systems and a lack of agility, as other speakers have already mentioned. Heavily concentrated sourcing from seed all the way to mega retailers has resulted in a lack of regional crop diversity that everybody is noticing. Diversity is also lacking in logistics options. Production and distribution has been consolidated and controlled by very few companies and is now starting to show signs of cracking during this disruption. Typically, price locking and contract agreements between big players serve to drive costs of food down, and there's rarely allowance for stresses and challenges there's no reset for mutual benefit. If there's a disaster, one of the trading partners has to eat it. And food insecurity is exploding in both rural and urban areas. And sadly, this is no news, but clearly there is a profound lack of sound agricultural policy and national leadership. In our own region, thankfully, what we're seeing is more of a both-and scenario. These broken systems on the national and international levels sadly exist in our own backyard. For example, almost overnight, our own local food bank jumped from serving 32,000 households a week to 52,000 households per week. That was almost overnight. Restaurant purveyors and other smaller businesses with no reserves are scrambling to prevent bankruptcy. And farmers losing their restaurant and institutional customers are trying to pivot and find new outlets. And on the ground, social distancing is slowing everything down. People just haven't figured out how to redesign their operational systems yet. There are extreme delays loading trucks due to short staffing. There's a shortage of drivers nationally. This preceded the endemic. And we've all seen long lines to get into grocery stores. And just try being 6 feet away from someone on a cherry packing line. But what's really unsettling is that nobody knows what adjustments are only temporary and what is going to have to be adapted over the long term. We're also seeing a lot of resiliency in the supply chain. That's going back to our values chains. It's structural too, but a different kind of structure. It resembles more what we see in nature. It's decentralized. Diversity is at the core of this ability to adapt. Mutual aid and symbiosis are critical. This alternative structure was built over decades by many people in many locations with tremendous effort, leadership, and hard work. In thriving, organic, regenerative, or sustainable food movements, we see the following: a sense of community, a shared purpose, dedication to environmental improvement and planetary health, a passion for nutrition and human health, and a celebration of food as culture. There's lots of creativity happening all over. Mana Foods on the island of Maui was one of the first retailers to offer special services to kupuna, their elders. Exclusive access during certain hours, personal shopping, and curbside pickup. Many retailers, both large and small, have adopted these practices. When sanitizer became impossible to come by, our friends at Sacramento Co-op partnered with local distiller South Fork Vodka for hand sanitizer to keep their customers and staff safe. Existing food hubs and CSA businesses are figuring out how to change their focus to provide for frontline workers and others in need. And community businesses and farms are also figuring out new ways to engage and connect to consumers by ramping up their social media efforts. I've seen a lot of that. How many emails have you gotten lately? And NGOs like World Central Kitchen are transforming independent restaurants into community feeding centers across the U.S. So what makes these value chains work, and why do they work differently than the industrial model? I believe that these localized alternative structures attract creative citizens who know how they fit into the big picture, the commons. It's not about scale only. Big is not necessarily bad. We need both large and small economies and ways of moving food. But when centralized structures are only organized around profit, they can't react with resilience. Value chains are relationship-oriented, based in the concept of long-term sustainability, and in every transaction, the idea of mutual benefit is key. Produce is based on repeat business. It's not about the quick buck. These trading partnerships are based on integrity, transparency, and good communication. Diversity, I've already mentioned that. These are dynamic networks, and they're multi-layered. Everyone has a different blend of production and marketing strategies. farmers markets, processors, wholesalers, CSAs, whatever. But cross-pollination and idea exchange are constant. These value chains are mission-driven. People want to integrate their livelihood, personal politics, and lifestyle. They want their work to be of value and valued by society. A truck driver or a farmer's market manager both appreciate they're part of a greater system, a food system. Whether they are eaters or producers, they get it. We all vote with our fork. In concluding, I'd like to say that this pandemic is offering us a tremendous opportunity to rethink what a future system of food could look like. Many people have been struggling with poverty and hunger before COVID-19, but many of us have been very privileged. Some folks are experiencing food insecurity for the very first time. An appreciation of logistics may be on the horizon, thankfully, which is a totally new concept to most Americans. There might be plenty of food, but if it can't get to the people who need it because of ineffective distribution, the food gets wasted and people go hungry. This brings us to heightened awareness of localism. Alice Waters said just the other day, the present crisis reminds us that food security depends on a local food system. We need to look ahead, but thoughtfully, with the common good in mind. What are people going to want to eat or be able to eat in 3 years? What will happen to luxury and import items? Surely they will become very scarce and much more expensive. But who will grow our food and who will prepare it? We can't and should not be returning to business as usual. We have a chance to change everything, but we must address equity in our food system. Profit cannot be our only measure of success. And accounting for the true cost of food would be a great place to start. This crisis has already elevated the essential importance of all farm and food workers. To quote peach farmer, author, and friend Mas Masamoto, it took an invisible virus to make farmers and food visible again. Thank you.
Thank you, Boo. We'll get to that question of distribution and pivoting a little bit more in the Q&A. But for now, we're going to turn to some of those issues that you raised about overarching policy shifts that govern the food system. Jenny Lester Moffitt was appointed to Undersecretary of the California Department of Food and Agriculture by Governor Jerry Brown. She works to engage stakeholders on these issues and issues that affect ranchers and farmers, including climate change, land use, water policy, food security. She's a fifth-generation California farmer and spent 10 years as managing director of her family's organic walnut farm and processing operation, Dixon Ridge Farms. On April 29th, the governor and CDFA announced a greatly expanded program to capture farmers' surplus produce, which was originally cultivated for restaurants, and redivert this to food banks and the elderly. We look forward to hearing about this and other programs and policy changes that are underway. Please join me in welcoming Undersecretary Jenny Lester Moffitt.
Thank you, and it's a pleasure for me to be here today. Certainly, as it was recognized at the beginning, this pandemic has been sobering. The debilitating nature of this virus has taken a toll on our people, on our families, on our communities, our healthcare system, and our economy. And we in the administration, like all of our colleagues in the food industry, have been working overdrive to minimize that impact. I'm going to talk a little bit today about the work that we've been doing, as Catherine mentioned, on our Farm to Family program in partnership with the food banks. But I first want to just take a moment to talk about some of the work that we've done at the beginning of this pandemic, ensuring that agriculture is a critical infrastructure, making sure that farm workers and farmers and the people that continue to produce our food have guidance available to produce food in a safe manner that makes sure that we're reducing and minimizing exposure with our employees as well as mass. So we've developed a series of guidance. They're all on our website. Many of folks probably on this call have been pushing out that guidance, and we want to thank you. And it's guidance everything from farmers markets and some of the things that Dan Sumner talked about to UPIC operations, really ensuring that ag remains open for business, but we remain open for business in a way that it is safe for not only our farm workers and our farmers, but also our consumers. We've also just announced, the governor just announced yesterday, 4.2 million masks that were distributed out to farm workers, really again to ensure and to fill that short-term supply gap that is out there with masks and PPE needs, personal protective equipment needs. Those are just a few of the things that we've been working through in the administration. There are many, many, many more. But I am very pleased to talk about the Farm to Family program. As it was already mentioned, over 50% of our food supply chain goes to what we call food service. So overnight, 100 million meals nationwide that you normally go through restaurants vanished essentially. So with over 50% of that food being produced for now a value chain, a supply chain that has essentially vanished because of the pandemic, we saw a huge disruption, not just, of course, in that movement, as Dr. Sumner and Chelsea talked about, in moving that food through retailers, but also that food that was being grown and the food that our producers have grown for that food supply chain no longer have that market. At the same time, food banks have seen an incredible increase in demand. Statewide, over a 73% increase in demand. Unfortunately, we have 1 in 5 households statewide that are food insecure at this point in time, with almost 20% unemployment. So we have these two unmet demands. We have farmers who have farmers who have product that is not available for markets that were created for retail and for wholesale, but also consumers that need that food and people at the food bank. So in April, at the end of April, the governor and Secretary Ross announced an expansion of our Farm to Family program and a $15 million campaign to do just that. The Farm to Family program is a 10-year-old program through the California Association of Food Banks. It is all about connecting farmers with excess supply with food banks in need. Our goal in this announcement is to keep farms farming and growing healthy food for Californians, at the same time meeting the needs and the so important needs of the food bank at this point. The Farm to Family program, through the Association of Food Banks, partners with growers who have excess supply. They pay a nominal amount of money to harvest and to pack and to get that food to the food banks, the 41 member food banks throughout the state. And that funding is goes to the farmers for that harvesting and packing, but it does not certainly meet the need at all that Boo talked about in really meeting the needs and in that marketing channel that the growers absolutely need. We were able to jumpstart the $15 million campaign with $3.6 million. We were able to redirect $2 million from the Specialty Crop Block Grant, as well as funding at the development CDSS that has a farm to food bank program as well. The growers have already been donating. They donate year round. Traditionally, it's a 10-year-old program. We're just growing and expanding that program. In January, they donated 11 million pounds. In March, that increased to 14 million pounds. And in April, that increased to 21 million pounds. So farmers are stepping up and meeting that demand that the food banks have. But I think absolutely what we need to have that conversation about is this is the short-term fix. This is to meet the need right now. And now it's time to have the conversation about how do we really support growers in meeting the supply chain disruption that we're seeing throughout this pandemic. And that is where we're really looking forward to having that conversation. We know that food insecurity is something that has been a problem and a challenge in our communities, in our homes, prior to the pandemic. And how do we really step up and look at our food system in a way that not only do we support our growers in producing healthy food, but also in the consumers and the people of our country who are so food insecure all the time. So I always like to say as a farm girl growing up, there's always been attention in our farm community on how we grow our food, what we grow. But now more than ever, there has been incredible attention nationwide, worldwide on how food is grown. This is really a time where we have this once in a lifetime opportunity to re-examine our food system so that we can be prepared and smart and strategic and equitable about how we get our food to consumers. This is also a chance for us in California to showcase what we grow in California, how we grow it in California, and the heroes, our farmers and our farm workers and everyone in between that get that food from field to fork. So it's a pleasure to be here today, and I look forward to the rest of our conversation. Thank you.
Thank you, Jenny. To summarize what we've just heard from all of our speakers, it does not feel like we are early in this crisis, but as Dan mentioned, we are early in this crisis. There are a lot of changes that are going to happen in the coming months now that prices are being locked in and farmers are more vulnerable because of the structure of contracts. So one of the big issues that we're facing is that the demand for a significant supply, a large volume of our food has shifted overnight, and farms that already had contracts that were already paid couldn't double sell that food. And so a lot of food has been dumped. And now we're in the process of shifting. So as we look forward in time, there are various estimates of when we might have a vaccine, when shelter-in-place orders might be lifted. There's also talk that shelter-in-place orders might be lifted in some places and then reinstituted. So there may be a need for the food supply chain to rapidly shift or toggle back and forth between institutional purchasing agreements and grocery purchasing agreements. And then, as we've also heard from Boo and from Chelsea, these regional local supply chains appear to be more nimble. They appear to be able to switch their marketing tactics, their processing and packaging tactics, and not easily. There are still growing pains in terms of distribution and finding enough truck drivers, but that toggling back and forth may be easier on the local and the regional level. And then on the other end, centralized supply chains are quite efficient, and there are a lot of people to feed. And food banks often rely on these larger scale streams, as opposed to what is now small scale supply systems in local food distribution. So we have these issues of a distributed but very, very small scale food system, as Dan said, meeting maybe 1-2% of the need, and then large scale systems which need to be reoriented. So now we're going to pivot into our Q&A, and we'll talk a little bit about how that might happen. So some of the ideas that have been floated around is to make the large scale suppliers more resilient by adding that redundancy that distributed food systems have. Other ideas are to scale up distributed food systems, but I think one of the big questions there, and this will be the first question for Boo, is are you seeing an increase in demand for locally produced short chain food? And are you also seeing an increase in farms who are looking for those outlets at this point?
No, the answer is we are not seeing that. We've not been approached by new growers, particularly because of the crisis. We are approached by new people entering the market or thinking about going into the wholesale market or switching marketing strategies or whatever. But so that is a sort of a constant flow. But no, nothing that I could say I could attribute specifically to this disruption We have experienced a lot of farmers changing their marketing strategies, you know, who were very reliant on restaurant business, for example, and regrouping. But the answer is no in the short term.
So to summarize, you're seeing massive restructuring on that in that distributed system as well. Dan, did you have something to add to that?
Oh, no, that's fine.
Okay. So the next question gets at how we got to this place in our food system, because it hasn't always been like this. We have consolidated and consolidated over time, which is what Boo brought up, as well as Dan. And some people are saying that the consolidation really sped up in the 80s with relaxed antitrust laws. So I'm wondering, Dan, if you have anything to say about this and how that has changed food supply chains.
In general, we've had a gradual increase in the size of farms and the fewer farms, decade by decade, going back, I don't know, 150 or 200 years. I mean, it's really been since the days when most of us, we wouldn't be spending any time on this call because we would be all out there farming, trying to stay fed and trying to keep our family fed. And the food doesn't leave the farm that it's grown on. And still, there are about 1 billion people in the world that still do that. So it's not gone from the planet, it's gone mostly from the United States. That is, by the way, the most vulnerable way to feed. That's the most vulnerable food system. If you have a supply shortage on your farm, your family dies. And we're a long way from that, and that's great. In terms of concentration among the food processors, that's been also pretty steady over the years. I don't know if there's been a big jump from one time to the other. In terms of antitrust, which is the law that says firms can't be big enough to control the market, there have been swings in that back and forth. I don't think that's been driving consolidation. What's been driving consolidation in the processing side has really been the efficiency of the system. And it's very hard to compete if you want to sell meat for $10 a pound to compete with somebody else who's willing to sell it for $6. Many of us can say, yo, we'd rather pay more, but when it comes to going to the market, we often don't.
Thank you, Dan. Does anyone have anything else to add to that?
You could get me started. Well, I just want to, on Dan's point, you have to compare quality to similar quality, and we've sacrificed a lot in our food system for this golden calf of efficiency, and we would like to, you know, reintroduce the idea of flavor, quality, nutrition, effectiveness, diversity, as opposed to merely evaluating everything on the on the efficient, can we get it from here to there cheap, and who's going to make the money off of that?
So there's the architecture of the network, the centralized versus the distributed, but then there's also the timing. So one of the things that were brought up by all of the panelists is how long-term the contracts are. And so I'm wondering if, Chelsea, you could speak to how long-standing buying contracts are impacting retailers' ability to scale up purchasing right now.
Yeah, I think to some degree, these longstanding contracts are a benefit. For example, in the meat specific, you know, we have a private label contract with Harris Ranch. We're the only provider for a private label here in California. So their bulk allocation comes to Raley's. And so when we've needed to lean on them and say, okay, we need more, the demand is significant, they've been able to deliver. So there is a benefit to some of those things. Mm-hmm. On the other side, it's what agility do we have as an organization to bring on some of those new vendors? And we've done a little bit of that. I think a great example is Woodland and the work that they do with the food front. And how do we accelerate those vendor partners that are within that network that we know are good stewards through the food safety, quality assurance, all those kind of traditional things. And so I think that's where we've been able to leverage is how can we be agile and make some adjustments in the short term to bring on more people that bring on a different form of food that maybe didn't have a retail background before. Maybe they were selling B2B or, through a farmer's market that they're not getting the same foot traffic that they were before. And so I think those are the things that we've identified as opportunities to be a smaller, regional player that has strong roots within the community.
Dan, did you have something to add to that?
I just wanted to agree 100% with where I think Boo and Chelsea agreed with each other very strongly about personal relationships. So she was talking about a long-term relationship with, in her case, Harris Ranch, but I think every part of the food system, people are depending on trust. They want to deal with people they know and trust. And whether it's a big company or a little company, that's been my experience. People really interact with each other in a way that's trustful. And the other thing, a place where I really wanted to reemphasize Boo's point, and that is we have a food system, if we do it right, that allows people that want to buy cheap or can't afford anything else can do that. And the rest of us, those of us with a little more income can also satisfy what we want. And one of the beauties of the way that, particularly I think we're fortunate here in California compared to some other places, is we just have a huge variety of places to access our food. And you can go to retailers that Boo's company supplies, you can go to Raley's, you can go to everything in between, including farmers markets, and satisfy food demand. And it's that ability to sort of meet incredible variety of demand for customers that's one of our strengths. But it does mean we take it for granted, and we say, gee, why wasn't organic coconut milk available to me this afternoon when I went to the store? And it doesn't even occur to us why it wouldn't be there. And I think this crisis has made us appreciate just how much we demand from our food system.
Absolutely. I would say too that what was emphasized with the food security, the networks of food supply that feed the growing food insecure population, is that those are built on personal relationships as well. And there is a local, regional aspect to that. Jenny, do you think you could speak to how that started? Because it started with a small group of farms and has grown.
Yeah, absolutely. So the California Association of Food Banks, through the Farm to Family program, has traditionally had about 128 farms who are day in and day out, month in and month out, part of that network. And that network is growing of farmers who are really part of the California Association of Food Banks Farm to Family program. And then, of course, through the association, there's, of course, a lot of trading that's happening between areas of the state where there are strawberry production and areas of the state where there is grape production, for example. So there is that personal connection and that network there, of course, within the food bank system that is also so important. And it's very similar to the supply chains that we see through retail and through restaurant distribution, but at the food bank system as well. I think one thing to also just on that, the previous conversation to really to focus on as well is just this notion that California's, we're growing over 400 different crops in the state. We're growing over $50 billion in farm gate sales every year. We have 70,000 farmers and ranchers, of which over 70% are family farmers and ranchers. We do have a pretty incredible system of growing here in California. We're very nimble. We also should celebrate, and this is a great chance for us to really talk about what we do when we're growing, the work that we're doing to take care of our farm workers, not just during this pandemic, but always, the farm worker protection, the pay protection that we have here in the state. So when you're buying California grown product, you're supporting those policies that the state has in place ensure that the farm workers are protected as well. The same goes true with environmental standards as well, water quality, air quality. We're stepping up and we're meeting that need through what is grown here. So just using this as a chance to really talk about this pandemic and the emphasis now and the focus that people have on how food is grown, to really talk about what we do in California and how we grow it and who's growing it and how we support who's growing it is, I think we just have a really incredible chance to use the moment to really shine a light on that as well.
Thank you for that. And in using the moment, many cities and counties are saying, look, we have a solution that works in the crisis. Could we possibly take this forward? Are you seeing, Jenny, any promising policies that are coming out that might work now, but also work going forward?
Yeah, so it's interesting right now, and I see some of the comments coming in on the CARES Act. The CARES Act has really been focused on emergency funding. So what do we need to just meet the need right now? What do we need to meet food insecurity right now and meet that need? I think over this summer, we're going to see a lot more. We're already starting to see and hear conversations that Congress is starting to have on the food system. How do we really support a resilient agriculture in the nation? But I think right now, most of the action at Congress has just been on, let's just make sure that we minimize the impact to our farmers, to our eaters, to our consumers. And so that's really been a lot of the focus of CARES so far, really making sure that we're supporting and getting food to the food banks, and that we're supporting our food banks and getting the food out to those in need as well.
So building on that, on the food insecurity, as we've talked about, the food insecurity is driven by rising unemployment. But as Dan mentioned earlier, there have been some price increases with eggs quadrupling in price. That's come back down. But at the same time, while Dan has said he doesn't anticipate future shortages, farmers are going to be squeezed because of the prices. So we're at a moment where farms are particularly vulnerable, and as shelter-in-place ordinances get lifted in certain areas, there might be a need for a food system that is much more nimble, that can toggle on a weekly basis almost between institutional and grocery retail. So Chelsea, do you have any ideas about how that could come about?
Yeah, that's a tough one. We've often, chatted about the pace of this pandemic and how agile we've had to be in moving and finding solutions. The benefit from the produce side is what I chatted about earlier, that we're buying daily and we can, work on those allocations with the individual farmers. And that's kind of, again, how we've gotten some of these new SKUs and new supplies into the chain. So I think we can, we'll continue to see that. I don't see it shifting then as restaurants start to reopen and that demand shifts, that, we would lose our suppliers, so forth. I do think there's a question around how quickly the community wants to turn around and go back to restaurants. And so I do think the demand from the retail side will continue to be an increase. I wouldn't say as significant as we've seen to date, but we are anticipating that level of demand. And so the hope is that the supply chain, we're giving them those signals based on our numbers. They're catching up as we go through week by week. And so you'll see less of the shortage. You'll see less varieties, as I talked about, but I think you'll see less of the shortages across the entire chain.
Thank you. Dan, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I'll leave it at that.
Okay.
We've got an expert. I don't need to throw in anything.
Boo, is there anything you want to add to this toggling between institutions and restaurants that might happen going forward, and how Veritable Vegetable plans to meet that?
I thought Chelsea was going to touch on this, but one thing that we have seen in the retail and also with the box and home delivery customers is a lot more of the fixed weight packaging. there's curbside retail preparations happening with Instacart and everybody else's schemes. And then now we have the delivery systems going to the people in need and food banks. But to that end, and even people who are just shopping on the retail level, I thought it was really interesting that just as we were gaining momentum as an industry, as a trade, to eliminate so much plastic and extra packaging and trying to minimize our waste stream, now this happens and everybody wants clamshells and pre-bagged things so that they can just grab and go. And so we're gonna have to put all of our environmental concerns about packaging on hold, I think, for several years while people reset and go back to the fascination with fixed weight. And so that's a trend that I was going to mention, but it was kind of off my main thrust of politics.
That gets at the packaging and distribution. So thank you.
Yeah, we're going to see more shifts like that, I think, to your question, as people try to remain agile, whether they're big or small, national or local. We're going to see a lot more trying to tailor what people need in real time and react more quickly when they don't want it.
And you have expertise in building up and cultivating both demand and supply for a new type of supply chain. Are you thinking that there are going to be emerging trends around that?
I'm hoping so. I really do. I'm with Jenny on this. We have a great opportunity to really, all the panelists really have said the same thing. And Andrew's remarks about, there are a lot of other issues that we talk about, workforce compensation. That's a fundamental driver towards poverty and hunger. So until we really look at all of these issues systemically and understand that people, no matter where they are in the food chain, they need to be compensated fairly, and that's going to change the price of food. So we really need to, and we need to really bring in the things that have been shed off of the cost of food, like environmental degradation and health and things like that, the diabetes. That I'm sure the economists here can speak to it much better, but if we bring all these issues back into how we calculate the cost of food, it's going to change things substantially, and I think for the better.
Thank you, Boo. That's also happening at a time when we're seeing rising unemployment and demand with our food banks. So that rising cost of food is a real challenge. Getting at costs and supply chains and differences. I'm wondering as well, and this is a question that we've had, if there are differences neighborhood-wise. So some neighborhoods don't even have grocery stores since they're food deserts. And so are we seeing different shortages in different neighborhoods? Chelsea, I think that would be a good one for you to start us on.
Yeah. For the most part, I would say across our chain specifically, it's been pretty stable and pretty consistent, but you are right. I think what we're seeing is the increased demand to get products delivered. So of course, we've always been scaling delivery. That had been of course, a priority to the business in terms of our e-commerce side of the house. But that's something we haven't talked about. That was a huge demand increase. We hired over 750 people just to start to fill those orders. So I think delivery has been a great option for us to reach some of those zip codes that we know have food deserts and that have significant challenges. I'll give credit to a locally owned company, Food Jets. They've been able to scale with us significantly. And once we can identify those needs and working with our local electeds, we've been able to fill them as much as we can. But I think, that's been, I think, the biggest opportunity here.
Thank you. Jenny, do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I will add that we've also been putting in place, as schools have been such an incredible part of the food network, the food supply chain, and then of course distribution and getting healthy food to kids. And so that work continues throughout this pandemic. Schools are still open for distribution, and they've been filling a lot of those needs in those, especially in those food desert areas. We've also launched the Great Plates program in many cities throughout the state, and that's been largely successful. It's been a way to reactivate some of our restaurants and then actually use those restaurants to prepare 3 meals a day for seniors who aren't able to leave their home right now. So that's been a very successful way to really also reach some of those food insecure people as well, just because they're not able to leave their homes right now. So those have been a few things. We continue to have conversations and work on our state at the state level. We have a refrigeration grant program, really working on getting refrigeration units to corner stores, to food insecure areas, with the emphasis on stocking those with California grown produce. And so that's been also very successful as well. So we're working in those areas as well. I think we're going to see an increase in how we make sure that that we're meeting the needs for all Californians and feeding them throughout this pandemic and beyond.
Thank you for that. I will let Dan take this next one from the top. So there are shifts in federal food policy right now, and a lot of different proposals circulating for funding and supports. How are those changing some of the state and local responses?
Yeah, well, there's two categories, and maybe I could say, as usual, the really big federal dollars are going to two kinds of things that the federal government knows how to do, and that's pass out money. So I think we're passing out lots of money, and I've only heard strong support for this, for increasing benefits for food stamps, for lowering eligibility where we can, emphasis trying to get a food-tied money to people who really need it, as well as, the $1,000 payments or however much it was just to people, because I think food vulnerability happens when people are poor. And we can talk about food deserts geographically, but it's poverty that does it. You can have a rich person live 50 miles from the nearest store. They're not food insecure, they're rich. It's poverty that does it. And I really want us to put the emphasis on the poverty, because we have entered an era where we're going to have increased poverty. We're going to have, right here in Northern California, we're going to have increased poverty. People are out of a job. They don't know where the next money's coming from. And at some stage, we can't do that much more with federal dollars. Even federal dollars, there's a limit to. Jenny talks about what the state does, but we know the state budget is in terrible crisis. We know that we're cutting back on lots of other things that we used to think were crucially important. Boo mentioned the packaging movement, which 3 months ago people said, oh, it's the most important thing. Some people, most important thing around, we've got to do it. Now we say, no, let's get the food out there. The same is true with, Jenny was saying, research grants that we used to think were crucially important on specialty crops. Well, we've put them off for a little while. So the other big pile of money out of the federal government is in farm payments. And it's literally billions of dollars, additional billions of dollars paid to farmers who are really desperate for some cash to stay alive and just to keep operating. We could have done it with loans perhaps, but we're doing it with grants, and it's large amounts of money, tens of billions of dollars of money so far. And both of those things, I think, are sort of shoring up the system. The money, there's a relatively small budget by federal standards, meaning in $3 billion. Jenny was talking about several $1 million at the state level. At the federal level, they talk in billions. $3 billion nationwide. So California getting hundreds of millions of dollars to help food banks and others get, and there was USDA released just this week a list of grantees, a number of them here in California, who are getting literally millions and millions of dollars each, many of them, to get food physically into the food bank system to get it out to people. And I think, again, even even with the food assistance programs, there are people that fall through the cracks. Jenny listed a number of things they're doing. I think Chelsea and her company are doing things. Everybody's trying to contribute, but having the federal government throwing in billions of dollars has to help in that system.
Although there is some concern that those funds are being disproportionately given to the national scale suppliers. And if, as Chelsea mentioned, it's those regional suppliers that happen to be resilient, and as Boo mentioned, those small and mid-scale farmers who are literally farming on the edge of urban areas, that might create, do you think that might create further problems with consolidation? Because as Chelsea mentioned, those regional suppliers seem to be able to pivot a little bit more quickly.
Yeah, I don't think consolidation is the issue, but we all, everybody that's looked at that list, I mean, it's a long list, so that lots of small outfits are getting small amounts of money. But as usual, remember our objective here isn't this program isn't to change the food system. It's, at least for now, let's get some food to people who need the food. And, you know, it's sort of like the packaging and other things. Let's get the food to people. And if you have I don't know, a Food for America or Feeding America, some very large consolidation of food banks, maybe they are the best way to get emergency food out to people in the short run. I don't know that. I have gone through the list, and some outfits distributing milk in Puerto Rico have millions. Other places that are much more local are getting hundreds of thousands, and that's absolutely true.
Right, and if it's those regional supply chains that can pivot, then perhaps that's where the added resiliency could be built on.
Yeah, perhaps so.
Which brings us to another question that we've had, which is, I think the panelists have done a wonderful job of reassuring us that California's regional and local and even national production and supply chains are going to be fine. But what if the supply chain breaks across the U.S.? How might this affect people in other areas? Chelsea, do you want to take this one? Just thinking about your competition.
Yes, I'll tackle it, but I think Dan probably can give a better answer from the national level. You know, we're having conversations with all of our retail partners to your point, to better understand what some of the challenges that exist. You know, I think for the meat specifically, I think there's been a little media hullabaloo for nothing. We haven't seen it yet. We haven't seen the devastating photos that we saw. But again, this is very true to this crisis of that we've been seeing something in the media, we've been changing our behavior, we've been over purchasing, and that has created the shortage. And so my hope is that the reason why the meat hasn't been as significant is one, that the producers moved quickly to make adjustments and deliver the product, but two, because we've all realized that the product will be there and to keep up. And so I think, you know, everyone across the entire nation is really trying to make sure that those needs are being met, and that level of flexibility on the consumer side helps dramatically.
Thank you. Dan, did you have anything to add?
I'll just say, we do rely on the rest of the country for most of our meat here in California. You know, we don't have a tiny hog industry. So for example, anyone that likes bacon or a pork chop, it's almost surely coming from the rest of the country. Even on the beef side, we have relatively few feedlots. Chelsea mentioned Harris Ranch. It's the one we all know because it's right on I-5. There are a handful of other reasonable sized feedlots, but almost all the cattle in California, our hillsides are full of calves. They're put on trucks and sent out to the Midwest to be fed. And that's because when we get the meat back, it's cost effective. Now, if you have the income and you want to spend it on locally grown meat, you can certainly do that. A good friend of mine has a ranch up in Shasta County, sells Prather Ranch beef. He actually has a humane slaughterhouse right at his ranch because he believes in that. But he doesn't have enough beef to deal, for example, for Rayleigh's. Rayleigh's is far too big for his ranch. And I think he's a wonderful supplier locally, but we're going to rely on the rest of the country for most of our meat. They rely on us for our vegetables. So I do want to get 2 bits worth in here. The worst thing that could happen to California agriculture is local consumption. Because if the rest of the country says, oh, we're going to go local, you shut down California agriculture. 80% of what we sell leaves California because they can't grow lettuce in Detroit. They're not very good at it. They can try, they can do a little bit indoors. I've gone to farmers markets in almost every state and all over Canada, and it's wonderful, and it's one wonderful place to be, but they can't feed themselves their fruits and vegetables and tree nuts, etc. So our and dairy products for that matter, our milk industry ships cheese all over the country. So we would really have, and Andy, I haven't mentioned wine, but imagine we had a local wine movement such that nobody bought California wine anymore because they wanted to count on only drinking Ohio wine. What I'm saying is California agriculture, the beauty of California agriculture, the luxury that we all live with, really depends on us sending products all over the country and all over the world. Otherwise, we just wouldn't have nearly the size of agriculture that we have now. They depend on us, and we do a great job for them.
I find that that reaction to the fear that we might all go local really interesting, and I wonder if Boo could talk about that. Are we in danger of California all of a sudden going local and us being able to scale up from 1-2% all of a sudden to 100%?
You know, I really can't give any statistics. I don't think that scenario is going to happen. I don't think everybody's going to go local. I mean, we're not going to turn back the clock. What we have to be is smart about integrating both scales. We have to capture the effective methods of a consolidated system for what they're good for without exploiting people, without exploiting resources. So that's one. I mean, I'm not saying get rid of it. I'm just saying we need to redesign it so that it's not toxic, it's not exploitative. And by the same token, I'm as passionate as I am about artisan and local, and we eat lettuce here at Veritable. We say, who grew it? Is this Bruce's lettuce or is that Tom's lettuce? That's how identified we are with the actual producer, other than growing it in our own gardens. But I'm not expecting that to be translated everywhere, but a blend of both of those things would be much healthier, much more resilient, and is much more modeled on the way nature really balances things. You don't just consume and grow indefinitely, or you collapse.
Well, to round us out at the end here, I want to ask Jenny this last question about how we can support farmers, because as Dan mentioned early on, there are going to be price points set that are going to make particularly small and medium scale farms more difficult perhaps to operate, especially under a more consolidated, centralized, and stressed out food system that's trying to toggle. Do you have any advice to the viewers?
Yeah, I think Boo said it so well, that a blend of all of our different food systems that we have, local, domestic, international, but really taking it back and really focusing on and paying attention to what we're purchasing, who we're, what we're buying, what we're supporting, and the policies and that is behind that. So as we talk about what's being grown in California, the California policies that we have here for farm worker safety, for environmental protections, those sorts of things are absolutely important. So really paying attention to where our food is grown, regardless of, and of course supporting food from around the world. We always will. Just as I think Dan talked about our coconut milk that we so long for, that is never going to be, well, I could stand corrected. It is not currently grown in California. So we will continue to purchase food from around the world, but really just celebrating the farmers and thanking the farmers and the farm workers who are producing that food and paying more attention to our food. We're seeing that already by consumers, and I think we'll continue to see that as the months go on.
Thank you. I want to thank the panelists and also thank our audience for joining us in this virtual platform. If we didn't get to your questions, and there was a long list of questions we didn't get to, please submit them on the feedback survey that we're going to send out after this, and we'll work to address them in future programs. Over to you, Andy.
Thanks, Catherine. I want to thank Undersecretary Moffat for joining us today, as well as Chelsea Miner from Raley's and Boo Nigerans from Veritable Vegetable. Finally, I would like to thank Professors Dan Sumner and Catherine Brinkley for their insight and expertise. I also want to thank all the Robert Mondavi Institute and UC Davis Library staff who have spent many hours to pull off this great program on very short notice. And finally, thank you for attending. If you enjoyed this evening's event, we hope you'll consider joining us again on May 27th for an event on the public health and political issues around sugary beverages. You can also find information about that event at savor.ucdavis.edu, where we will also post a recording of this event in a few days. And we look forward to future events on important topics around food and beverages. Please do take a moment to leave feedback on your way out, and good night.